Well, friends, I'm so excited to be here. I know you hear me say that all the time because every time we start an interview, I'm always like, hey, I'm so excited, but I really mean it this time. I mean it all the time, but I super mean it this time. Am I old enough to say that or too old to say that? I'm here at the Christ the Bridegroom Monastery in Northeast Ohio to interview someone that I'm kind of fangirling about right now, to be honest with you, because I'm here with Mother Natalia. And if you have seen Pints with Aquinas, you've seen a few other things. Plus, she has her own fantastic podcast that I want all of you to subscribe to right now on their YouTube channel. It's called What God Is Not. And Mother Natalia is a good friend of a good friend of ours. Bree Solstad and her husband are good friends of ours, and they are very close friends with Mother Natalia. And when we were coming through, I called Bree. I was like, hey, do you think you can pull some strings and get us an interview? And I had to pay her a lot of money, but no, she was able to make it happen. And we're here. Stella and I are here on our way across the country on our rosary trip. And I'm so excited to meet you, Mother. It's an honor. Everywhere I go and people talk about you, I kind of was expecting classical music to play when you walked in the room. And, maybe levitation. I don't know. But, no, I'm not trying to embarrass you. But your reputation precedes you. And I'm just so thankful to have the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, it's really good to be with you. I'm excited. Bree and her husband have shared great things about you and your wife, so I'm glad to be here. Awesome.
Well, tell me a little bit about this place and your role here, and then we're going to get into how you got here in the first place. But full disclosure, I don't really know much about Eastern Catholicism. Mm-hmm. I go to the TLM and the Novus Ordo back home, but we don't have any Eastern Rite liturgies near us. Okay. I know there's one that's kind of sort of close by. A friend of mine goes, but nothing that I've experienced yet. So I'm very excited to pray Vespers with you later.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about this place and what goes on here.
Sure. So yeah, Eastern Rite, we're a Byzantine Rite monastery. So the word rite is referencing the ritual of the liturgy. So anyone who celebrates the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom would be of the Byzantine Rite. I think that's true. I hope that's true. Someone will correct us if it's not. So anyways, we're Byzantine Rite. And then within the Byzantine Rite, there are several different churches. So there's like Ukrainian Byzantine or Melkite Byzantine. And we are Ruthenian Byzantine. The Ruthenian Byzantine Church is from along the Carpathian mountain range in Europe. So it's not like Ukrainians would come from Ukraine and Hungarians would come from Hungary. But then anywhere along the Carpathian mountain range would be Ruthenian Byzantines. So Slovakia, Hungary, Ukraine, that whole region there, we have Ruthenians. So our monastery started in 2009. So St. John Paul II, when he was Pope, he released an apostolic letter called Orientale Lumen, Light of the East. And it's referenced often, like when people talk about breathing with both lungs, that's a reference to Orientale Lumen, in which, again, I think that's true. Now that I say that, I don't know if that's true. I think that's true. He talks about breathing with both lungs. And the meaning the East and the West. And so what I do know for sure, even if the both lungs thing is not in Orientale Lumen, is that in Orientale Lumen, St. John Paul II called for a revitalization of authentic Eastern monasticism, especially in basically North America.
Awesome.
So
Check. Okay, we're good. Yep. I always do this at least one time. Okay, we're good. And now, when I do that, if we stop, just cut to the wide shot, and then I can seam that back together. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm curious. You don't look like you come from any of those parts of the world, obviously. So how did you wind up in a Ruthenian Byzantine monastery in Northeast Ohio?
Yeah, fair question. When I was in college, so I was raised Roman Catholic, but then my whole family left the Catholic Church when I was in high school. And then series of events that I'm happy to talk about if you want. But then I came back to the Catholic Church when I was in college. And then shortly like less than a year after coming back, a friend of mine was like, hey, have you ever been to a Byzantine liturgy? And I said no. And so he took me to this Byzantine liturgy. There's a huge debate out there in the world as to whether or not this was a date. I stand firm that it was not a date.
Okay.
But there's a big debate out there. And there's been like a poll that was put out. Anyways, so I attended a divine liturgy, an Eastern liturgy, and I just immediately fell in love and started going every Sunday after that.
So when you grew up Roman Catholic, but was that the center of your life? Were you like, was your family like super hardcore Catholic or sort of like, all right, we're Catholic?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because my faith was very superficial for sure. It was the center in that we were very involved in church. Like my mom was the director of religious education for a while and things like that, at least in one of the places that we lived. And would like help out with Vacation Bible School and things like that. So we were very involved in church. There wasn't really much practice of the faith at home in that, like we would pray grace before meals, but there wasn't really other prayer as a family, and or we didn't like, I don't know, celebrate our feast days or our baptism days as a lot of Catholics will, or something like that. So, but
did you have like a personal faith that you felt like that was the center of your life, or were you just sort of like a churchgoer? No, I was just a churchgoer. I was raised, I think I was raised with good morals. Like good morals were always very important to my family. But yeah, I didn't talk to the Lord. I didn't try to listen for him or see what he was doing in my life or anything like that. It was pretty much like, those are the things that happen when you're at the church, regardless of whether it's Vacation Bible School or Sunday, but not so much at home, or as I'm like hanging out with my friends or things like that. So when did that change for you? When did you feel like faith became important to you in a personal way? There are two instances that I usually give, because it's not like, I don't know, there aren't particular points necessarily. It was very much in hindsight, I can see that the Lord was slowly working in my heart, or I was slowly allowing him to work in my heart. But I remember, so I said my whole family left the Catholic Church when I was in high school. At some point after we had left, I felt like something was missing. And so I started going back to church on my own. And I started attending the youth group there. And then while I was involved in youth group, I noticed that the kids that were in youth group had this great joy. And I was really struggling in life. I was pretty miserable. I was struggling in relationships. I didn't feel like I had friends at school. I was, there was just a lot of struggle going on, a lot of self-hatred, a lot of self-doubt. And so I saw this joy and I was like, I just want to be around this joy. Yeah. And what I wasn't realizing in that is I wasn't even kind of thinking about having this joy for myself. It was just like, I want to be around it because I didn't feel like I was around a lot of joy. And then I actually ended up, so maybe I should share. I think context will be helpful. My family left the church when my brother was injured in Iraq. And that's one of those things where it's like, at least for me, that was the turning event. That's why we left. That's why I stopped going to church, was his injury. And it was the whole, this whole concept of the problem of suffering and why do bad things happen to good people and so on and so forth. And just, and I struggled with that, and I didn't really have anywhere to direct my anger. And so I kind of directed it at God, but it was more so just, I didn't really know what to do with that. And I think that when someone goes through a very big traumatic event, it can either push them towards God or it can lead them away from God. And it had the latter effect in my life. So
the reason that's important context is because then, like I said, something was missing. I went back to church. I started getting involved in youth group. And then shortly after getting involved in youth group, my parents took me out to dinner to tell me that my dad, who had less than a year before retiring from the Navy, was being sent to Iraq. And I was furious. Like, I was like, this time I'm leaving the church. I have no desire to go back. Maybe God exists. Maybe he doesn't. If he does exist, I don't want anything to do with the kind of God who allows this to happen. Like, my dad is one of the best men that I know, one of the best men that I've ever known. He's just such a good man. And I was like, you don't do this to good men. And so I was really angry, and left the church for what I thought was forever. And then when I was in college, I was invited to Mass by the RA of my dorm. And I had no interest in going to Mass. I had a lot of interest in this guy. And so I said I would go to Mass just because I wanted to hang out with him. And then at Mass, it was the first time I'd been to Mass in years. And I just, like, something in my heart cracked open. And I just wept for most of Mass. I wept through the consecration. I felt the presence of our Lord. I wasn't catechized enough, or if I had been, I had forgotten about the true presence in the Eucharist. So it wasn't even like I knew that the Lord was present in the Eucharist, but I felt his presence, which I think is a grace. I don't typically feel his presence in the Eucharist, even now. Like, that's not really an experiential thing for me. So anyways, I think that moment also was maybe when I started letting him affect me as a person. And then from there, the same guy invited me to his adoration group. No interest in adoration, a lot of interest in this guy. And then after the adoration, they invited me to a Sikh conference. At the time, it wasn't called Sikh, but that's kind of dating myself. And so anyways, at Sikh, or at this focus conference, I had that same experience of youth group where I was around all of these people with so much joy. But this time, it wasn't, I want to be around this joy. It was, I want that joy in my life. I want that joy in myself. And whatever they have, I want it. Whatever they have, I want him. So.
Did you ever mess around with, like, other kinds of churches or anything like that? Or was it always either Catholicism or nothing?
It was always either Catholicism or nothing. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I talked to a lot of people who, when they leave the Catholic Church, someone usually invites them to, like, a Protestant worship service or student ministry at a campus, and they go and they're like, oh, wow, this is cool. I never had this before. That's what happened with my wife. You know, it was like, this was amazing. You know, the person inviting her was me, but here we are. I
think I could have had that experience. That just didn't, like, the man who showed up in my life, who was a really amazing evangelist, just happened to be Catholic. And so I think that really, like, it could have been, obviously, I have no doubt that the Lord would have led me back to Catholicism regardless. But if that RA had just been a good Protestant evangelist, then I would have gone to a Protestant church with him. So.
Yeah.
Also, as a spoiler, this man was never interested in me. Like, he actually was genuinely just a good man, a good evangelist. And he saw that I was living a life of misery and wrecking my own life. And he basically just wanted to save me from myself. It was really, really beautiful.
Doesn't that just give you hope that sometimes it just takes an invitation? Mm-hmm. I meet so many Catholics who are like, I don't know what to do. What do I do? Do I have to give somebody the Summa to teach them about the faith? Or we're so intimidated to share our faith with people. Sometimes it's just, hey, come to Mass and hang around with other Catholics. Mm-hmm. And God can use that in some incredible ways. So that's awesome. Okay, so you go to adoration. You're starting to feel all this stuff. What did you do next?
Well, then I just started getting more and more involved and doing things with, the focus group on campus. And
what year are you in college at this time? Is this like your first year?
Sophomore year.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, this is my sophomore year. But you know, it wasn't really like a simple, well, once I came back to the church, then everything was fixed and it was easygoing. It was actually in some sense, when I think of the time in my life that I was the most depressed, I think it was after returning to the church.
Really?
Yeah, which I think is probably shocking to a lot of people. But I think it was a matter of I had to confront myself, and I had to confront the fact that this life that I'd been living for a few years at this point was not in accord with who I am, and it was not in accord with the Lord, and I had to kind of come to terms with that, and just like this cognitive dissonance that I'd had for years, I had to breach the gap, and that was really painful for me. And so it was this constant like taking masks off and not seeing what I liked below the mask. But what I really, when I think of the mask analogy, we talk about wearing masks all the time, but what I like to tell people is we put the masks on because we think that what's under the mask is ugly. And I think sometimes what is under the mask is ugly, but that's because there's something even more below that and even more below that. And it's like we just have these layers of masks, and what's at the core is beautiful. But then all of these distortions, all of these lies, all of these self-deceptions are the ugliness that we're putting on top of that, on top of that, on top of that. And I think that we're scared to take the masks off because we're scared that the more we take the masks off, it's never going to become beautiful, and that we're just going to keep seeing ugliness, and we don't want to affirm this belief that we already have about ourselves, that actually there's no goodness below it. Like we're never going to hit the level of good. So anyways, that's really what I wrestled with when I came back to the church, was just coming to terms with all of these things that I'd been doing for years, because I was pursuing everything that the Lord told me would make me happy because I was miserable, and it wasn't making me happy. And so that was part of it, but there was also a part that was just like when you build up these habits, they don't just go away overnight.
Yeah. And
so I was constantly just falling into this self-hatred of, I'm still doing these things, and I now believe that they're wrong. I'm now telling people that they're wrong. I'm now confessing them. And so why am I still doing them? And it's just like those things, even if your convictions come overnight, the habitual actions don't change overnight. And so I was living this constant tension between what I believe is the truth and then what I'm actually acting on, which is not the truth. And part of it too, like part of the pain for me was I didn't just rip the Band-Aid off. I was kind of like, what if this Jesus thing is just the next fad? And if that falls through, I don't want to have lost all of the relationships that I've built up. So I'm still like going to adoration on Thursday nights and then frat parties on Friday nights. And so that kind of like built-in division in my life was just, I wasn't loving the Lord with an undivided heart. And so that division was really adding to my own struggles, my own depression. And yeah.
That's so interesting. I think the mask thing is interesting because what are we trying to cover up, right? Mm-hmm. We know who we are, but yet we feel like we can try to fool ourselves, or we can try to fool other people. But yet at the core, we wrestle with that, and we sometimes have that identity crisis of who am I really supposed to be? Who am I trying to be? And then it almost seems like the enemy will come along and exploit some weakness or some insecurity that you might have and find a way to just totally derail your progress. But I wanted to ask you about the issue with your brother. When you were starting to come back to the faith, how did you process that? Was it any different? Did you come to a peace with that, or what did you do with that? Yeah,
that's a good question. Can I first just give a little bit of pushback on something you just said? Because I disagree that we know who we are. I think there's actually a huge identity crisis in our society today, and I think most of us don't actually know who we are. So I would just give a little pushback on that.
Push back all you want.
Yeah, of just, I think that I think that most of our journey in the Christian life is discovering who we are and coming back to that truth and coming back to that core reality, of like working our way back to the identity that we were born with. Because even from just the earliest times, we start putting on these masks, and don't realize that they're masks. And so I think most of us see, maybe to deeper degrees, some level of masks and believe that's who we are. So I think I just would.
No, that makes sense.
Maybe,
I think that's a good point of clarification. I'm just thinking about when I've been in those situations where I haven't liked who I've seen in the mirror, or when I look deep in my own heart and I go, man, that's not who I want to be. And then I purposely try to go then, okay, well, if I want to be more of this or more of that, I'll go overboard by trying to compensate for that. And then at the heart of, then I'll kind of have these interactions with people sometimes where I'll go, okay, this is the kind of person I really want to be, you know, because I want them to like me, or I want them to think I'm smart, or I want them to respect me or whatever. But then I'll step back from it, and then I'll have that imposter syndrome, you know, where it's like, that's not who you really are. So I guess like in that sense, I feel like that's what I mean. Like when you know that you're trying too hard or whatever, but maybe that does come from a sense of, if you really knew who you were, you wouldn't have to do that.
Well, and I think it comes with, I think that you have a spiritual sensitivity that a lot of us struggle to have. Like you're in touch with your heart in a way that maybe a lot of us aren't. I think that the monastic life has very much developed this sensitivity in myself as well. And so it's like, even if I don't know, because actually something that's interesting of what you just said is at no point did you say you know who you are. You only said that you knew this is not who I am. And so I think that there's actually something there of, I think that we can feel this disconnect with our own hearts and realize that like, this is not who I am. But then that still kind of leads to the question of, well, then who am I? And so I think that there's still like something deeper there to search for. And so I can give two examples of this. Like we don't even know who we are necessarily. And these are kind of silly examples, but they're recent examples in my own life. So one less recent one was maybe like, how long ago was this? I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. No, even more than that, probably 15 years ago. Oh man. I graduated college 13 years ago, and that just seems insane. So anyways, somewhere around there at some point in college, I was making myself coffee and I put cream in it because I had always put a little cream in my coffee. And then at some point I was like, do I actually like cream in my coffee? And I tasted black coffee and I realized I like black coffee better, but I had always put a little cream in my coffee because my dad always puts a little cream in his coffee. And so I just always assumed this is how I like coffee. And it took me like a few years of drinking coffee before I realized, no, I actually don't like that. I thought that I did. This is what I've always, if someone asked me, do you like cream in your coffee? I would have said yes. I don't actually. But so that's like a very silly example, but a deeper one was one that I just discovered this a couple years ago. Was I was just praying through some things in my own life and realized that growing up, I really idolized my sister very much, my older sister. And like when people ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she's 8 years older than me. And so when they ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I wouldn't say I want to be a ballerina or I want to be a doctor. I would say I want to be a Heather when I grow up. And which is beautiful. It led to a lot of pain for my sister, just like that pressure that, to live up to and things. And so I've realized over the years how difficult that was for her. But anyways, just a couple of years ago, I started to think back on how many things in my childhood I did because I thought this is what my sister would do, or this is like, if she sees me do this, she'll be proud of me, or she'll think I'm cool, or she'll, like so many things, for my entire childhood. And then and then I had to ask the question of, do I even like the things that I think that I like? The things that I've told myself for the past 30 years are my favorite color, or my favorite this, or my favorite that. Like, how much of that was actually me versus me wanting to be the person that I wanted my sister to think was cool? So anyways.
Wow. That's really deep. I've been thinking lately about what the ideal man is. You know what I mean? And when I think about that, I think of these attributes. I think he's kind, he's strong, he's charitable, he's wise. You could think of all these things. And then, the object of that thought exercise is then to go, okay, well, if I want to be that, like, what is the ideal man? Because there's a lot of talk in our culture about masculinity, toxic masculinity versus whatever, healthy masculinity or whatever. And I've just been thinking a lot about this, trying to figure out, well, what is this supposed to be? But at the core of it, sometimes I stop and I just go, well, you can't make yourself really those things if they're not already there to a certain degree, because then you're just talking about actions. And then, because then I would go around and around in my own mind and be like, well, okay, well, if I'm just doing these things because they are on a list, is that really legitimate, or is that just more mask putting on?
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of reminds me, again, this is sort of silly, but it kind of reminds me of a priest friend of mine from Colorado. Whenever he would go to someone's house for dinner, like when a family would have him over, they would ask, like, they always want to make dessert for the priest, right? And so they're like, what's your favorite dessert? And he would always say, I want whatever dessert you make the best. Because if you tell someone what your favorite dessert is, and they've never made this, then probably you're just going to get, like, maybe not probably, but it's likely that you will get a poor imitation of your favorite dessert, right? But if they're making what they make best, then you're having a good dessert, even if it's not like your favorite dessert. And so it's just a more enjoyable experience. And I think that there's something here about what's the most attractive way of being is to be, as best as you can, the person that the Lord created you to be.
Yeah.
Not to be trying to meet the characteristics that you think are the ideal man or the ideal woman, but how the Lord has formed you to be, how he's formed your heart, how he's created you to be. Yeah, because there's something just incredibly attractive about being who we really are, right? Because what God creates is beautiful. And so if the person that he created in you, like, you must be beautiful. And so try to uncover the beauty that he's created, as opposed to grasping for this other kinds of beauty that you're seeing around you that you want for yourself.
But what do you do with the parts that you don't like? Like, let's say you go, well, who I am is like really irritable and impatient and full of anxiety about stupid things that shouldn't matter. And I hate that about myself. Do I just go, well, that's who God made me to be, so I guess I'm just going to just dig into it? I mean, what do you do with that?
Right. Yeah. No, I'm not talking exactly about, like, because now we're getting into the realm of actually, like, vice and virtue, right?
Sure.
And so we should always be trying to root out the vice.
Because I think people hear
and fill
what
it
you
in
said.
with virtue.
I think this is important because I think our culture, when we talk about this stuff, they don't go as deep as what you're about to do. They just go to desire, and they go, well, because I desire to do this, that must be who I really am. God wants me to be happy, and if this particular thing that I like to do, even though it might be sinful, it makes me happy, that's who I am. I should just be me, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think I would. There's a difference between happiness and joy, first of all. And I think a distinction there is, like, just because something gives me pleasure in the moment doesn't mean it will give me lasting happiness. And what the Lord wants for us is lasting happiness. What the Lord wants for us is joy. And, you know, it's interesting because I think we have this misconception of when we think about sin, I think we can often think like, well, there's just this list of things, this list of like arbitrary things that for whatever reason God doesn't like. And so if we do these things, it displeases him, and that's why we shouldn't do them. But actually the things that are considered sins, the Lord has enlightened us that these are sins because he's telling us these are the things that are just bad for you. These are the things that will not make you happy in the long run. These are the things that are damaging to our relationship. And our relationship is what's going to bring you joy. Our relationship is what's going to bring you fulfillment. It's not just this arbitrary list of, well, I can't do that thing because it displeases God. It's, I shouldn't do that thing because it's harmful to me, which is what's displeasing to God. It's not like he sees this act and he's just like, oh, that's an icky act. It's like he sees the damage that's happening to us and he doesn't like that. And that's why we don't sin, right? We don't sin for the sake of relationship. So I was just listening on my run this morning. I was listening to a Q&A with Bishop Eric Varden. Have you heard of the Desert Fathers in a Year podcast?
No.
It's spectacular. I completely adore Bishop Varden.
Desert Fathers in a Year. Mm-hmm. Okay, I like that.
It's put on by Exodus 90. And it's really, really wonderful. And so he's a Trappist monk bishop in Norway, Bishop Varden. And he's doing this Desert Fathers in a Year podcast. And I was listening to a Q&A with him on the podcast this morning. And someone asked the question of... It was basically, I struggled with sin for many years. I had a conversion. I've been living as a devout Catholic for like all of these years now, but then I'm still struggling with this sin and it hasn't gone away. And so what do I do with this? Do I continue to strive and struggle against the sin? Or do I accept that this is just something that the Lord wants me to live with for the rest of my life? And Bishop Eric gave a beautiful answer, but I actually, when I heard the question, what immediately came up in my heart was, well, both. It's not a matter of either we fight the sin or we accept that the Lord is allowing this sin. I think that we have to hold these things in tension of, we never stop fighting against the sin. We never just give up and allow this sin to take over and allow this sin to win and allow this sin to kind of command our lives. We never allow evil to just command our lives. And at the same time, while we're fighting against it, we accept that we don't know when the Lord will heal us of this, or if the Lord will heal us of this before our deathbed. And I think that's actually a good question for us of, do we trust in the Lord's mercy in that he loves us even in the midst of this sin, in the midst of this struggle, in the midst of this temptation? In my Pints with Aquinas videos that I've done, my personal favorite, I think, is one of the ones where I called it something like, that's not the point. And I talked about this in one of my interviews with Matt as well, of just, we just have this like really skewed view of what sin is, which I already touched on, but it's like I think we can get this backwards in our mind. We can think, I want to be holy so that I don't sin anymore. I want to be perfect because I don't want to sin. And it's like, No, that's not actually the point. That's not the goal of our life. The goal of our life is union with God. Sin being rooted out, like, of course, there's no room for sin in eternity with God. There's no room for sin in this perfect relationship. But it's not like I want the perfect relationship so that I don't sin.
Right.
I'm trying to fight against the sin in order to work towards this relationship and in order to be in fuller union with God. But we're so focused on our own, like, it's really just pride, you know, like we want to be perfect. We want to not have this sin, not because we want relationship with God. Often it's not coming from that. It's coming from like just this sense of self-righteousness almost.
Yeah. I talk to people like Protestants that want to argue with me about the Catholic Church sometimes with regard to things like, are you saved by faith alone or once saved, always saved? And one of the questions that they will often ask is, well, if you believe in mortal sin, you know, there's this list of sins, which sins, you know, what is it that you have to do or not do that will send you to hell or this or whatever like that? And what are the good works that you have to do in order to earn your way into heaven? And it's really helped me to think about it. And it goes exactly with what you said, that in baptism, we have that union with God. And if we maintain that union with God, we're there. Mm-hmm. Sin is just it takes us out of that union with God. It doesn't, so it's not so much like everything's great and then, we did a bad thing and we just don't want these bad things. It's that what they take us away from. Mm-hmm. They take us away from union with God. When you're baptized, you're there. Mm-hmm. And the restoration of that status through reconciliation brings you back into that place. It's not like you get these little check marks. Oh, you did all these great things. Those are a means to an end. Mm-hmm. And the end, like you said, is union with God. Mm-hmm. And that's so powerful to think about it. And that's what we're made for, is union with God. And sin just is what the devil throws at us to take us off course.
Yeah.
But I think we can get so twisted in that when we can start to think that sin that we have in us is who we really are. Mm-hmm. You know? So, you know, kind of back to identity, when you were rediscovering your faith, did you struggle with that? Did you struggle with, well, who really am I? I mean, I left the church, now I'm back. Like, how did that play itself out in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where a lot of that disconnect and that tension within myself came from is, in a lot of ways, I just felt like an imposter being in the church, you know, of like, again, I'm saying that I believe these things are wrong and I'm still doing a lot of them and kind of, identifying with them in some ways of, I don't know. I think that's really easy for us is to identify with our sin and think that this is who we are. I don't know if I can give any more specific examples of that, but
you got to a point where you weren't going to let that wound that your brother suffered, you know, his injury, and then the wound in your heart of I can't believe in God because of that. Mm-hmm. You overcame that somehow, obviously.
Yeah. And I think suffering, the concept of suffering is still something I struggle with. I think it's something that all of us struggle with for our entire lives, right? I think a lot of the healing came from just seeing some of the fruit that suffering has borne in my life, some of the good fruit that suffering has borne in my life. I've been reflecting on this a lot recently, this past year, actually, because there was like something that happened in my life, and the details of it aren't important, but something that happened that was just devastating to me. And I thought, okay, you know, we say Romans 8, all things work for good for those who love him, but not this. Like, this one can't work for good because I'm thinking through all the different ways this could play out. I'm thinking through all the possibilities, and there's just no way that good comes from this. And then a couple weeks later, one of the most beautiful gifts in my life came about. because of that devastation.
Wow.
And I was like, this is impossible. and it's just something that I never could have predicted. And it just started in my heart, kind of this, just like playing on repeat, your ways are not my ways. And that's really become a prayer of mine. And it's shifted even from, I think when I started that prayer, your ways are not my ways, it started as a prayer of like surrender, a prayer of just trusting that your ways must be better than mine. But then as time went on and I continued making that prayer, it became a prayer of gratitude. Because I've seen, when I try to manage life, I've seen the destruction that comes about, which is crazy because I clearly am so much better at being God than God.
Of course.
Yeah. And I have just a much better plan, and everything's more organized and more ordered, and but then somehow it leads to chaos. And then he does the opposite. He takes all of this chaos and brings it to something beautiful. So yeah, I think just there's been a gradual conversion in my heart over years, over many, many years, of just realizing that it's a great gift that his ways are not my ways, and the beauty that can come from suffering, and and even ways that my brother's injury have nurtured a greater compassion in my heart that I think wasn't there before, and and different things like that.
So your ways are not God's ways, the plan of your life, all of that stuff. At what point in time were you kind of like, seriously, Lord, you want me to become a nun?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
That's a great question. I'm not really sure how it happened.
There's a lot of daylight between getting back into the church, going to mass, going to adoration, coming back to faith, and then becoming a, Athenian, Byzantine mother.
Yeah.
So Ohio.
Yeah. So, and the fact that the fact that I came back to the church because I had a crush on this guy is kind of a microcosm of my life. Like, most things I did in life were inspired by wanting the attention of some man. And so, just like absolutely boy crazy. And shout out to John Irvin, a Catholic out in Denver. At least the last I knew, he was in Denver. And he, at that first Focus conference that I went to, and I had been back in the church for like a few months at this point when I go to this Focus conference. And he said to me at that conference, "You're so boy crazy. You're going to be a nun." And I got so angry at him. I was so angry. And so John Irvin was the first one to know somehow. And I think he said it as a joke, but it was like accidentally prophetic. There was a lot of, which it's always funny too, when I tell people, when I share my story in kind of like the elevator version of it, and I just mention, if it's like a parish or something, and I just mention that I came back to the church because I had a crush on a guy, there's often some like pious old lady who's like, "You mean Jesus?" And I'm like, his name was Kelly.
I had a crush on Jesus.
Yeah. So
that's hilarious.
Yeah. But I mean, that's a huge misconception in and of itself, right? Is like a lot of the people that I told, people who were like Catholics who would go to church on Sunday, that I told I was becoming a nun, they often would say like, I used to want to become a nun, and then I realized I like boys. And I'm like, I still like boys, for the record. But that's just like this huge misconception. So anyways, I was dating a lot. I was, and I wasn't discerning, discerning religious life when I first came back to the church because I had never really met nuns. And so in my mind, it's like men become celibate priests. They give up marriage and family and all of the beautiful things that come with that. But then they get to absolve people of their sins, and they become the vessel through which bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ. And so they're making this huge sacrifice, but then they get these like superpowers. And nuns don't get any of those superpowers. And so, yeah. And so in my mind, it's like, so why would a woman become a nun?
Right.
And the logical answer was, well, if she's ugly and can't get a boyfriend. And I was dating these guys, and so I was like, I don't need to think about becoming a nun because I'm dating guys. And then a couple years later, I meet some nuns from this monastery, actually. They come by my home parish. And I realized that, like, they're beautiful, and they totally could have been married. And so then that just shook things up for me of, like, there must be something to the nun thing that I didn't know. But it was hard for me. So going back to this concept of the Lord wants our happiness, the Lord wants our joy, he wants our fulfillment. That was the biggest hurdle for me to get over in discernment, because once I did start discerning, probably the longest phase of that discernment was one of me saying, Lord, I will be a nun if you want me to, but I'll be miserable. Or I'll be a nun if you want me to, but I'm going to be a terrible nun for this, that, and the other reason. And it's just like we have this idea that the Lord ever calls us to something that ultimately won't be for our own joy and fulfillment, which is just absolutely absurd. So I had to get to the point in my discernment of believing, or at least intellectually assenting to, the reality that if the Lord is calling me to be a nun, then that is where I will have the most joy. And that is where I will find him in the clearest way. And that is where I will be the most fulfilled. And I needed to get to that point to get past the fear of discernment, because otherwise it was always this, like, I'm discerning, but I'm afraid that he's going to call me to be a nun. And so once I was able to at least make that intellectual assent and then visit the monastery and realize I actually enjoy being here, then that was just a huge, huge difference for me. But my first visit to the monastery was for 3 days, and I came 99.9% sure I was called to the married life. I love men. I love children. I love being in the world. I loved the work that I was doing, all of this. And so I was like, but I will spend the rest of my life wondering what if I didn't at least go to a monastery. And then I left that 3-day visit 50% sure I was called to the married life.
Wow.
And really angry about that. So I called my spiritual father and I was yelling at him and I was like, this is all your fault. You made me come here, which he didn't. But I was like, you made me come here and blah, blah, blah. And he's laughing. And I was like, that's not funny. And he's like, you'll laugh with me one day. And I was like, no, I won't. And so anyways.
This is, okay, so I'm getting a picture now into why you pushed back on me earlier about not knowing who we are.
Yeah.
In a deeper level, because it's almost like we think we know what we want, but God really truly knows.
Yes.
And I think
absolutely
I relate to that so much. When I was thinking about Catholicism, people ask me all the time, oh, well, what was it that made you want to become Catholic? I said, I did not want to become Catholic. There was literally nothing that made me want to become Catholic. I tried as hard as I could to not be Catholic. I'm so not the person you think would be Catholic. I love, modern contemporary music. I love long biblically based sermons. Everything, mostly from like a liturgical perspective or whatever. I'm not made for that at all. And what I discovered was I didn't really know. I thought that's who I was. But when I became Catholic, it was like I discovered the reality of who God made me to be in terms of a worshiper.
Yes.
And I feel so much more fulfilled in worshiping God in the Mass than I ever felt before. But I was convinced that I couldn't be happy as a Catholic. So it's kind of funny. You mentioned, well, I'll be a nun, but I'll be miserable. When I got to that point where I was like in my conversion, I'm like, okay, Lord, you're calling me to become Catholic. I will do it. And it will be a sufferfest my whole life, but it's the truth. I knew it was the truth, but I'm like, I don't belong there, but I have to do it because it's the truth. And I can tell you, and I know that you know this, the amount of joy that I get, even at the cheesiest mass I've gone to, it far surpasses anything I ever experienced before. And I just look at the Lord sometimes and I just thank him because I thank him that he didn't listen to me tell him what I'm supposed to do.
His ways are not our ways.
That's so true. So when you're discovering that, I'm smiling thinking about that, because I can only imagine what it'd be like. Because I mean, the truth is, my life changed, but your life really changed.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so you get to this point where you're 50-50. Were you still feeling though, like, well, I'll be miserable? Or were you feeling more like, I need to do this because it's right, but I'll still be miserable? Or were you like, no, I could actually live like this and be happy?
I think at that point I realized I could live like this and be happy. And part of it was, so the visit that I came on, when you're talking about this deep joy that you'll feel even at like the cheesiest mass, it was really the perfect time for me to visit when I came on that 3-day, because the superior of the community at the time, her sister had just died of breast cancer. And so the funeral was during my visit. I didn't go to the funeral, but anyways, there was obviously a lot of grieving happening at the monastery. And then we were about to have another discerner visit the monastery who's severely allergic to cats. And the monastery had a cat at the time. And so I was helping prepare for her visit by scrubbing the walls and scrubbing the floors. And so what I'm saying is, like, it was not a naturally fun visit, right? Yeah. There is grief and there's this hard work. And I remember like scrubbing underneath the dining room table and saying, this girl better have a vocation, this girl who's coming. That girl is Mother Eliana, so she did have a vocation. Okay. But would have been fine if she didn't. But throughout the 3 days, I had a deep joy. And so it was the perfect time for me to visit, because if there had been that like natural fun, like we're just having a pizza party while I'm there or something, then it's like
that. Oh, it was fun.
Exactly. Yeah. But the Lord, and this is how the Lord has always worked in my life. When I've given him even 2 seconds to speak to me, he's abundantly clear, because I'm very stubborn. He knows I need burning bushes. In my discernment, when I asked for signs, he gave me an abundance of them, which I don't think typically happens. I think it happened for me because I'm extremely weak and stubborn and all of this. Most people just have more faith than me. So anyways, but it's that joy. He allowed me to taste the joy that I could experience if I trusted that he's going to call me to what will give me joy.
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, I think that's the most important place we can get to in our discernment, where we can actually believe that he wants our joy. Because then it's like, if we can get to the place where we say, I'm unafraid to discern this thing, because either I wouldn't be joyful there, in which case the Lord is not going to call me to it. Or if he's calling to me to it, there will be my joy and peace and joy. When I'm giving spiritual direction, I often will have my spiritual children pray with the fruits of the Holy Spirit, and really try to be attentive to kind of an assignment, I guess, that I give sometimes that I would encourage your viewers to do as well, is like, think of a time that in hindsight, you're confident you were doing God's will. Mm-hmm. Whether it was a decision that you made, or an event that you attended, or a talk that you gave, or whatever. Like, think of a time that you're confident that you were doing God's will in that moment. In hindsight, even if you weren't sure at the time. Think back on that time, and what fruits of the Holy Spirit can you notice were present in you at that time? And then you can use that maybe as a reference, as a guiding principle of like, these are the fruits of the Holy Spirit that maybe the Lord really works through in my own life. and be attentive to those fruits of the Spirit. So for me, primarily, he's worked through peace and joy, which in hindsight, I can realize, like, that's what I saw in that high school youth group was their joy. And that's what I saw at that focus conference was their joy. And that's what he gave me on this 3-day visit. And so then, and then regarding the peace, so I was 50-50, like you said, but I was really anxious about that. Like, I needed to know the answer. And I was at this point open to whatever the Lord wanted. I think, again, there's self-deception. And so in hindsight, I know that there were blocks in my heart, but more or less I was open to what he wanted. And, but I was really anxious to just like know what it is now. And so there was still some fear and still like avoiding the monastery and things like that. But eventually I came back for a 6-week visit, an observership. And on that 6-week visit, I started out 50-50 and very anxious. And at the end of the 6 weeks, I was still 50-50.
Really?
But very at peace. And just like, the Lord will make this clear to me when it's time for it to be clear to me. And one of the most important pieces of that discernment, at the end of that visit, I had realized that part of my draw to the monastic life at that point was I thought this is the only way I can be holy, because I'd had so many unhealthy and unholy relationships with men that it was like I couldn't even envision a healthy and holy marriage for myself. And so I recognized on that observership that was a big problem, because we're all called to holiness regardless of our state in life. And so I didn't want to become a nun if I thought this was the only way I could be holy. I wanted to become a nun if this was the way I felt the Lord wanted me to be holy, but not because like it's not an option to be holy in marriage. I just knew that wasn't a healthy mindset. And so I wasn't ready to apply, and I thought that needed to be healed before I could further pursue monastic life. So I kind of paused on my discernment. I ended up dating a guy, and after only a few months of dating, I had a dream one night. Well, and I should say, actually leading up to this is important for the few months of dating, and even probably before we started dating, I had this kind of like underlying anxiety in my life, and it would come up in spiritual direction every month. But it was like, I wasn't anxious about anything. We were looking at my work, we were looking at my relationships, we were looking at where I was living, and like everything. I wasn't anxious about any one thing. There was just something underlying, some underlying anxiety. So anyways, I'm dating this guy and it's going well. And then I have a dream one night that I said to him in the dream. I said, I love you, which I hadn't said to him in real life, but I said, I love you. And I know that you would be an amazing husband, and you would tell me I'm beautiful every day, and you would be an amazing father to our children, and that we could be holy. But it's not enough. And then I woke up from the dream, and it wasn't like I thought that this was a vision from the Lord, or that it wasn't anything like that. It was just, I woke up, I remembered the things I'd said in the dream, and it just all resonated. And I felt the truth of what I had said. And in that moment, I was like, I just don't think marriage is ever going to be enough for me. Especially after my experience at the monastery. I don't think I can ever settle for less than the Lord. And so I realized that after that dream, but I was still kind of afraid of that reality, and so I kind of pushed it down. And then I had spiritual direction, I think the next day, and my spiritual father and I are out to lunch, and so we're having direction over pizza, and he says, he's like, so how are things with with work? And I was like, they're good. And he's like, how are things with your boyfriend? And I was like, they're good. And we're just kind of going through the things, and for like half an hour or whatever, it's just very calm, and which is not how spiritual direction with Mother Natalia usually is. It's usually it was usually like 45 minutes of me yelling at my spiritual father about how he doesn't know me and he doesn't know what he's talking about, and then like half an hour of me realizing that he's right and telling him I'm sorry and I love you, but it was just like really chill, and I'm not bringing up the dream. I'm just like, yeah, everything's great. And he's like, okay, well, this is like a really easy direction. And I was like, yeah. So listen. And then I asked him, do you remember the time that you told me, which this is like some of the best discernment advice I've ever received. I said, do you remember when you told me that sometimes when people are really 50-50 in their discernment, they don't necessarily suddenly feel called to one or the other. They suddenly realize a desire to be called to one or the other. And he said, yeah, but it's okay if that's not how it works with you. And I was like, but you remember saying it? And he's like, yeah, but that's not how it is with everyone. And I was like, but do you remember saying it? And he's like, I remember. And I was like, I think I want to be a nun. And I didn't know the words were going to come out of my mouth. But then as soon as they did, all of that anxiety I'd been feeling for those months was just gone. And it was just peace. And he was like, okay, I think we should keep talking. And I was like, could we get beer? And he was like, yeah. And so we ordered some beer and we keep talking. But it was like, that's why I say the joy and the peace. Because, and for me, I think it's like, oftentimes it's the joy is in the active experience. Like my time at the monastery, there was a joy. And then in my prayer, there's often just the deep peace. And so it was like, there were the surface level things of, I had to break up with the boyfriend that I loved. And that was not a pleasant experience. And I had to quit the job that I loved. I had to leave the state that I loved. But beneath all of that, beneath all of those surface level anxieties, there was a deep underlying peace.
Wow. That's amazing. I think that, you talk about God wants us to be happy. God wants to be happy. I think that's a language that a lot of people use. Mm-hmm. But in my view, peace trumps happiness. Mm-hmm. Because happiness, and I know that you talked about the difference between happiness and joy, but I don't think you can separate joy and peace. Mm-hmm. I think you can separate happiness and peace.
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm.
So to be able to look all of that unpleasant stuff you had to do, but at the same time to know that's what you were called to, and what was interesting about what you said was you didn't say in that moment, this is what God wants me to do. You said, I think I want to be a nun.
Right.
And it's almost like that's when that convergence happens. Mm-hmm. When what God wants and what we want become one. Mm-hmm. That's union with God right there. I think sometimes we make it way more complicated than it needs to be. But it's like, we just think sometimes, well, it's all about me doing the things I don't want to do or avoiding the things I really do want to do to make God happy. Yeah. But it's when we get to that place where we go, no, what prayer is all about, what worship is all about is getting to the point where we want what God wants. Mm-hmm. And when we get to that point, even in little things, you could argue that we never truly get there in this life in every aspect. Mm. But I think that sanctification or those levels of that, it's when we realize that more and more we're getting there. Mm-hmm. I really want what he wants. I really want what he wants. And it's not, I really want to want what he wants. Mm-hmm. Like you said, I want to be, because I thought you were going to say, I want to be a nun, but you didn't. Mm-hmm. You said, I want to be a nun. Mm-hmm. And I just had this vision of God, the Father, just smiling so big when you said that. And your spiritual father probably as well, because, okay, he's seen you struggle with all of that. So do you still want to be a nun? No.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Having become a nun, when you were going through that process, though, you make that decision. You're like, okay, I want to do this. Does a switch just flip? And now it's all about that. And now it's just steps to get there, or are there still multiple levels of discernment that have to take place after that?
Oh yeah, absolutely not. So much discernment.
Yeah.
There's so much discernment. And there were several times that I almost discerned out. And I think that's fine. Like it's really important to us in our monastery. We want the Lord's will. And so when people are discerning with us, like we've had people enter the monastery and then we've had people leave before life profession, and that's fine and that's healthy and that's good. And I often tell people, I think there are plenty of men who are called to be seminarians who are not called to be priests. And I think who like the Lord wants to form them in some sort of way through the seminary for marriage. And I think similarly, there are plenty of men and women who I think are called to religious life or monastic life who are not called to life profession, who their time in the monastery can just be formative. And we certainly don't want someone here if it's not what the Lord wants. Because it's just like, okay, great, that gets us one more person to help with the workload around the monastery. But then also you're living with this person for the rest of your life. And if they're not living God's will, then that's rough. And now I will say that I do believe that it's not just a matter of like, so there was a lot of discernment leading up to my life profession, and a lot of times that I considered leaving. The most serious time that I considered leaving was about 6 months before my life profession, actually. And so when people ask me, like, when did you know you wanted to be a nun? I usually say the day I made my life profession. And I'm not exaggerating. But I do think that it's important to note, I really believe in the mercy of God and the grace of God in our own participation in our discernment. And so I think that if someone is like, has discerned incorrectly, you might say, and then make their life profession, well, now that is God's will for them. It's not like, well, it wasn't his will, and so like, but now it is once you make your life profession, right? Like maybe, you were called to be a nun, but you got married instead. God is now calling you to be married. It's not like, well, I need to fix this. I need to change this. So even when I say like, well, we have to live with someone for the rest of their life when this wasn't what they were like, I think that, when that happens, then maybe the way is a little more rough and it's not exactly like the cross that was originally created for you. And so it might be a little more clunky. It might be a little more, but like, this is what the Lord wants for you now. So anyways, I've really been graced with, from the time I made my life profession, which granted, I only made my life profession like 4 years ago. But from the time I made my life profession, not once have I even doubted that this was what God wanted for me. And I think it's fine if I did doubt. I'm not like, if I have some doubts tomorrow of like, was this really what God wanted? I think that's fine. And that's not going to freak me out. And I can lean into the reality of, in some sense, it doesn't matter because now it is what he wants. And now this is where I am.
That's such a huge point, because you talk to people who say, oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. Now I'm stuck.
Yeah.
You're not stuck. You're where you're supposed to be. That stuck thing sometimes is our own desire to do our own thing, or feeling like maybe God can't use this situation or me in this situation. But we're all called to be faithful wherever we are.
Right.
So for you in this role here so what does it mean when you say Mother Natalia versus Sister Natalia? Because I know there are multiple mothers here, and because there may be people, I'm sure there are people who are watching that they don't understand the monastic life at all. They don't know what that means.
So, so there are 5 mothers in our monastery, and I am not the superior of the monastery. praise God, and please God, I never will be. I don't want that. And yeah, so in the Eastern tradition, every nun, when she makes her life profession, goes from sister to mother.
Okay.
Symbolic of her spiritual motherhood. So similarly, in a men's monastery in the East, when they make their life profession, they go from brother to father, even if they're not a priest. So yeah, there are 5 of us here who have made our life profession. So the 5 of us are all called mother. And then we have 2, we actually don't have sisters right now. Just because of where people are at in their discernment. It's like we have the life professed, and then we have 2 who are in the earliest stage of discernment in the monastery, who are not even sister yet. They're not even tantrid yet.
So life profession makes you mother. Mm-hmm. What's the stage just before that? It's
called Rasifor. So there are 3 formal stages when you enter the monastery. The first stage is called Dokimos. And it's Greek, I think, for one who is tried by testing, something like that. And we also say at our monastery that it's Greek for one who does dishes, because the dokimoi end up doing a lot of dishes. But so dokimos, and that stage is a couple of years, 1.5 years, 2 years, something like that. It's very individual discernment in the East in general, but especially like since we have a smaller community, we have the freedom to be able to have more of an individual discernment as far as like time and formation. So that's 1.5 years to 2 years. And then you're tonsured a nun. So the tonsure is the cutting of the hair. So there's a little symbolic haircut in the sign of the cross on the top of your head. And at that point, you're what's called a Rasifor, which means robe bearer. So you receive at your tonsure, you receive the full habit, and your new name and the title sister. And you also receive, you'll see this when we pray Vespers, but I'll put a robe on top of my habit called a riasa. So that's where the Rasifor, the robe bearer, comes from getting that riasa. And then that's for 3 to 4 years. And then you make your life profession, and you're what's called a Stavrofor, which means cross bearer. So,
wow, that's fascinating. Mm-hmm. It's so cool. Tell us about your podcast.
Okay.
What's that all about?
Yeah, so my spiritual father and I, the same one who I would yell at in my discernment, Father Michael O'Loughlin, he and I have a podcast together called What God Is Not. So it's a reference to what's called apophatic theology, which is more prevalent in Eastern theology. So there's cataphatic theology, which is talking about what God is, describing God, and then apophatic theology is talking about what he's not. He's ineffable, he's inconceivable. We know that he's all of the things that he's not, without restricting. Because whenever we talk about what God is, like there's always some sort of restriction, right?
That's so much.
In our failure and vocabulary and things like that. So anyways, the podcast is called What God Is Not, and it's Father Michael and I just sharing, reflections that we've been having, whatever has been coming up in prayer, and inspired by various interactions that we've had or things that we're reading or, someone that Father Michael was talking to in a bar or some experience that I had while I was on Pustenia, while I was on retreat, something like that. So, yeah.
And you're getting ready to run like a super marathon? That's what I heard?
Yeah, hopefully.
What's a super marathon?
Well, so
a regular marathon?
It's called an ultra.
Oh, an ultra. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And an ultra is technically anything that's longer than a marathon is considered an ultra. So like when you hear people doing like 100 milers and things like that, that's called an ultra. I'm not doing a 100 miler.
What do you do?
Mine is a 50K, so it's 31 miles.
31 miles.
Yeah.
Have you ever done that before?
No.
Wow. We'll keep you.
Let's hope I succeed in this. Yeah.
You will.
I mean, yeah. I think I can do it. So, and I'm putting the training into it, and it's So we'll see.
So you're running around Northeast Ohio and dodging all the Amish people probably. And,
yeah, dodging the Amish people and the horse poop.
Yeah.
And yeah,
that's awesome. So do you like it out here?
I do. It's an adjustment to just be in Ohio, coming from Colorado. I really miss the mountains a lot. But I love Amish country. It's very quiet. It's very peaceful. I never get tired of hearing the clip clop of the horses and things like that. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I just got one more question for you.
Sure.
I've been thinking a lot about this connection between joy, happiness, and what you talked about, and humility, pride, because I think there's this connection sometimes between the more we insist on our own way, the worse off we become. You know, this is just my own personal reflection or whatever. How do you help someone who says to you, I want to become more humble, but I don't know what to do? The more I focus on that, the worse it gets.
Well, I think you kind of just said it. I think that the problem is the focus on self, because we don't become humble by looking at ourselves unless we're looking at ourselves in reference to the Lord. Like if we can see even the goodness in ourselves as being a gift that we've received from Him, then we can start to really become humble. And I guess this is a difficult thing for me to talk about because I'm not humble. And so it's just like, I'm talking in theoreticals here, to be frank. But like genuinely, I really struggle with pride more than a lot of people that I know.
People would be surprised to hear you say that. I know.
It's really difficult.
When you said that, the first thing I thought was, come on. What do you mean?
I know. I have moments of humility. So I guess zoning into those, I would say the moments in which I've experienced growth in humility are the moments in which I've been able to receive affirmations from people and express gratitude to the Lord for those affirmations, and for His working through me and things like that. And I don't mean what I don't like, and hopefully this, I don't know, maybe I don't remember hearing anyone in this room do this, but maybe it's happened. I don't like when you thank someone for something and their response is, don't thank me, thank God. Because I don't think then that's actually acknowledging our participation in the Lord's will. And like, you wouldn't say that we shouldn't thank Mary. At least, a practicing Catholic wouldn't say we shouldn't thank Mary for her participation in the incarnation. And so I think that part of that humility is being able to receive affirmation from people and being able to be open to the possibility that the Lord wants to work through you. Like, that takes a humility as well. I think there's this problem of thinking that humility means I don't see any goodness in myself, whereas humility is actually, I can see the goodness with which the Lord has created me. Yeah, I think humility is really being able to see the reality of who we are. And being able to recognize that when we sin, I think the way that our sin can be a growth in humility is when we can recognize it's not a matter of I am that sin. It's a matter of that sin is not in accord with who I actually am. And it's not in accord with who I'm created to be. And I think that's a real humility, being able to acknowledge I've not acted in accord with who I really am. And I think most people see humility as thinking I am that sin. And I think that's a distortion.
I can't remember who said this. It wasn't me. I mean, I say it, but I didn't invent it. Humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you said there.
Yeah.
That's important, Well, I want to thank you for inviting us here.
Yeah.
I'm excited to get to pray with you guys.
I'm excited too, and have dinner with us.
It's going to be great. It's been an honor to get to talk to you and to know you, and thank you for what you do. I'm just so joyful to get the opportunity to meet with you and to share this with you. And I will encourage everybody to make sure you follow the What God Is Not podcast. Check that out if you like this kind of stuff. I love just the vibe of it, of thinking what God is not versus what God is. Because again, that we think whenever we say God is, that's the limitation. But God has no limits, and other than what He has put on Himself through who He is, you know, and that's powerful stuff. And what a beautiful place you have here, and a beautiful spirituality. I can't wait to get with you guys for prayer. So thank you once again for being here and for letting me be here.
Absolutely.
And I'm so thankful that you decided that you wanted to become a nun.
I'm really thankful as well. And I would say if someone wanted like an episode to start with for the podcast, just what just came up in my heart is one of my favorite episodes that we've ever done is relationship is greater than efficiency. That's one of my favorite episodes that we've done. So I would encourage you to maybe start with that one.
I'll put that link to that episode in the description of this video.
Great. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mother.
Yeah. Thanks for coming out. It's been great.
Right.